This worksheet was given as homework to a modern studies class at a school in Scotland, aged about 14. So let's get down to it and do our homework. So here we go. Topic introduction, social issues. There are many different things that make up your identity. Each of these parts, it can be argued, make you more or less likely to experience hardship or success in life. It says it can be argued, it's saying it is assumed for the whole of this worksheet. These make you more or less likely to suffer from inequality. They always talk about suffering from inequality. I mean, what about if you're on the high end of the inequality? Surely you benefit from the inequality in that situation. But they seem to use inequality as another word for discrimination or injustice. It's just assumed that inequality is a bad thing. We can describe this, for those who suffer less, as experiencing privilege. For example, if you are wealthy and powerful, you're less likely to suffer poverty and discrimination. Now, this is quite a complex idea. You really need to just stop and think about this one. If you're wealthy, you're less likely to suffer poverty. Have you got that? I think I can see some logic in that somewhere. I mean, this is what kids have been taught in schools. If you're powerful, less likely to suffer discrimination. Well, that's debatable, I think. I think some people in very powerful positions would say that they're on the receiving end of a lot of discrimination in various forms. But anyway, let's go on and get on with our homework, shall we? Right, identify. Age. Are you young, middle-aged or older? If middle-aged, tick. Right, middle-aged, tick. The older you are, the more wealth and power you gather. Oh wow, that's a real injustice, isn't it? The more work people do, the more earnings they have. So people work through their lives and save up resources. And so that's a privilege. It's not what you've earned, that's a privilege. Whereas if you haven't got that, it sounds like that's some sort of injustice. So surely what society should be trying to do would be to take away the money people have earned and give it to people who haven't earned it in the name of equality, which of course is already what happens. Middle-aged people basically pay the majority of taxes, and that's spent on education for the young, etc. Anyway, race. What is the colour of your skin? Well, in the summer, I have to say it was quite brown, but now it's gone more to a sort of pale pinky colour. White people in the UK are unlikely to experience racism. Well, that gives the game away a bit, doesn't it? Unlikely. But they might do, which just shows why this whole way of thinking about things is nonsense. Because in individual cases, the reverse might be the case. There might be someone with non-white skin who is racist towards other people and causing that other person to experience problems. Okay, similarly, there might be a white person who is experiencing racism, and that might not be the majority, it might be the exception, but that just demonstrates that trying to treat people in groups doesn't make sense. But certainly in some parts of the UK, white people are a minority. And whether they are or not, there are racial tensions between various groups in society. Anyway, what's the colour of your skin? I guess I'm supposed to tick that for white. Right, financial stability. Do you have large reserves of money in case of emergencies or left over after bills are paid? Right, that's a pretty strange question. The more money you have, the less at risk you are to financial problems, debt and poverty. Right, well, I'll give it a tick. Yeah, got money left over after the bills. Ethnicity. What continent, part of the world are you from? Well, UK and Europe. So I assume that's to be classed as a privilege in some way. But again, the implication that gives you some sort of unfair advantage. The advantage of being born in the UK and Europe is being born into a society that over hundreds of years has developed structures and systems and traditions that enable it to be a very wealthy and prosperous society. So that's great. But it's not a personal privilege for me. That's something that's been earned through generations and generations contributing to this society. Right, ability. Are you able-bodied or disabled? Right, able-bodied, yeah. If you're able-bodied, there are less barriers in life. Well, that is obviously true, isn't it? We'll talk about that a little bit later on. Sexuality. Do you identify as heterosexual, straight, or as lesbian, gay, bisexual, or other? Yes, no, no, no. Which I assume is supposed to get you a tick. People who are straight have never been discriminated against, that word's missing, and are not attacked in the street or online. That's funny, I thought some people who were straight had been attacked in the street. Yeah, but okay, yeah, we know it means some people get attacked because they're gay or whatever, yeah. Right, language. Is English your first language? Yes. Knowing the majority language is power. What? I mean, not knowing it is obviously a problem. You're excluding yourself from the mainstream of national life if you don't learn the language. So knowing the majority language is power. Therefore, I would say to everyone, if you're not speaking English, get on and learn it as a priority. Now, a lot of people who come to Britain, that's part of your cost-benefit analysis. You decide you'll move to a new country. Your income might be 10 times as high as it was before. You might experience a sense of cultural dislocation, and you might experience having to work in a second language. That's part of your decision in migrating to a different country. For refugees who didn't decide, I'm sure they'd be very appreciative of the welcome and support they're getting, and I'm sure they'll be very keen to learn the language. But this is suggesting the fact that you're a native English speaker is somehow some privilege that you should feel a little bit guilty about and think other people need something to make up for that. Right, class. Are you from a middle or upper class wealthy home? Yes. The higher your class, the better your connections, wealth, and access to respect. Again, not necessarily true, not necessarily true. Access to respect. Are the aristocracy respected in Britain, or are you more likely to be on the receiving end of prejudice and abuse or whatever? Debatable. But anyway, I'll tick the box to that. There we are. Right, religion or belief. Are you a Christian or some other religion, or none at all? Christian non-believers are not persecuted in the UK. Right, I'll tick the box for Christian. Christians are not persecuted in the UK. Oh, okay. So I assume perpetual threats to be sacked from your job and being stripped of your professional status, I assume they don't count as persecution, because being a Christian is a privilege. In Britain, children are taught in Scottish schools. Despite the fact that I taught lots of Christians who are frightened to articulate their beliefs because they fear the professional and legal consequences. But no. According to this homework, being a Christian is a privilege. Okay, is being a non-believer a privilege? I'm sure some people who are atheists as well might have something to say about that. Right, education. Are you qualified to a degree level? Yes. Higher levels of education equals higher income. Again, suggestion, there's some injustice here. We need to level the playing field. We need to make it so that people earn the same regardless of their qualifications. I mean, what's the point of classing that as a privilege? So the privilege is like something that's unearned. It just happens to have landed on you. You should feel, maybe if not guilty, you should certainly feel that people who don't have that advantage should be given something to compensate. Whereas surely we would just want to give everyone equal access to education so everyone can play their part. Anyway, right, gender. Do you identify as male or female and never identified as transgender? Yes. Transgender people are discriminated against and attacked physically and online in the UK. Yes, so are people who object to transgender ideology as well on some occasions. Well, they missed out of this. They've missed out male or female, because obviously being male should be a privilege as well. Oh, they've got it down there. Anyway. Right, citizenship. Are you a citizen of the UK with all those rights and protections? Yes. Do you have the right to be here that no one can take from you? Yes. Again, suggestion that this is a privilege, that in some way the people who don't have it, there's something unfair about that. People can apply for citizenship. If you choose to go to a country and not as a citizen, then you know the deal. Different countries have different systems. You know the deal, you know the process for applying for citizenship, and you make a decision accordingly. There's no point arriving then saying, no, it's not fair. I'm not allowed to do these things. The citizenship process is too difficult. You look at that before you make your decision of where you're going to go and live. And citizenship has huge benefits, but also requires your commitment to a society over the longer term, ideally. Right, so let's see what we're going to do next. Look at the wheel across and think about all the parts of your identity. Put a tick or dot in the segment if it applies to you, i.e. are you male? Right, here we go. Right, I'm male, I'm a citizen, I'm middle-aged, I'm white, secure financially, European, able-bodied, heterosexual. English is my first language, middle or upper class, Christian, credentialed education. Right, that gives me the full 12 out of 12 maximum privilege points. Now, our homework is not quite done, because as well as filling in this worksheet, we've also got a video to watch. So let's have a look at that. Now, so this video is from the BBC Educational Service, so it's for kids and for use in schools, presented by a basketball player. I mean, obviously, if you're trying to convince kids of a contentious political ideology, you need someone that they'll look up to and respect.
You've probably had discussions at home, at school, or at work, and in those conversations, you've probably heard the term white privilege. You may have even had this term used in a way that felt like an insult or an accusation. Others will have told you that it's all just made up to make white people feel bad, and none of this is right.
So the idea of white privilege isn't to make white people feel bad. Well, I think to some extent it is. And then some people say the idea is made up. Well, and there's some of that as well. But the BBC teaches us fact that it's not made up. I mean, any pretense of neutrality long since gone out of the window.
Privilege is a hard concept for people to understand, because normally when we talk of privilege, we imagine immediate, unearned riches and tangible benefits for anyone who has it. But white privilege, and indeed all privilege, is actually more about the absence of inconvenience, the absence of an impediment or challenge. And as such, when you have it, you really don't notice it. But when it's absent, it affects everything you do.
So race affects everything you do. So if you're a black person, you're going to get your car serviced, your race affected that. If you're disabled, you're watching a film on Netflix, it affects that. I mean, a moment's reflection reveals that that's just silly. I mean, this is a carefully scripted video, not just an off-the-cuff thing the BBC have thrown up there, but it just hasn't been considered at all. So it's putting forward the idea that privilege is the absence of impediment or inconvenience. So being able-bodied is a privilege. I mean, that's a really strange way of saying things, isn't it? It's like reversing the truth, if you like. It's not that being able-bodied is a privilege. It's just having some disability is a disadvantage, is a frustration, is a negative thing in lots of ways. But why do they do that? We'll come to that in a minute. So saying to black people, you might encounter racism that will lead to disadvantage, but not emphasizing that. He's emphasizing white privilege. So this shift in focus is trying to put over the idea that the real injustice here is that white people, able-bodied people, whoever, have got an unfair advantage. So once you've established that, what's the solution? Well, obviously, in order to achieve justice, you need to hit these people with an advantage with artificial disadvantages to compensate. So when it comes to race, the issue isn't tackling racism. The issue is we've got to hold white people back a bit in order to give black minority ethnic people advantages. That's justice. That's so-called social justice. So the idea of privilege is trying to communicate to people that you deserve to be knocked down a peg or two, and the other people deserve to be brought up a peg or two by artificial means, based on group identity, not personal circumstance.
There are lots of types of privilege out there. The privilege of being born into a wealthy family versus a poor family is kind of obvious. But then there's the privilege of being able-bodied versus having or acquiring a disability that most of us take for granted. I have two very close friends who are wheelchair users, and I'll be honest, when I first met them, I was completely ignorant about the everyday ways their lives are made harder through no fault of their own. Some of these ways are simply thoughtless, but some of them are just the way we live, just the way we build infrastructure, just the way everything works. That just makes their life harder than mine. That's just one of the ways that I'm privileged. And understanding that, embracing that, doesn't make me a bad person. But ignoring it raises the chance that my friends will be excluded in ways that are not obvious to me. And as their friend, I can't allow that.
Now, in my experience, I've worked with a lot of very wealthy families, and they often have the same problems as any other family. But being especially wealthy sometimes has its own set of problems for families and for children that are sometimes because and not despite the wealth of the family. But the idea of disability, that's nothing to do with privilege. But what he's doing here is effectively a trick. He's trying to draw a parallel that doesn't really exist. Now, the problems disabled people face, yes, some of them are to do with thoughtlessness. Okay, fine, someone parks in the disabled spot at the supermarket. Okay, yep, thoughtlessness. But then he says it's just the way everything works that makes their lives harder. Society is structured in a way that disadvantages disabled people. Now, this is what's called the social model of disability. But it's just not true. It tries to make out the problem isn't with the disabled person. The problem isn't that they have a disability. The problem is just society's failure to adapt. I mean, that just fundamentally is not right. So on their view, the fact that a wheelchair user can't go up to the top of a mountain, that doesn't show that's an unfortunate consequence of the disability. It shows that society has failed to supply smooth paths and tow lines up the top of every mountain in Scotland. But everyone knows the cause of the problems is ultimately the disability. Society adapts to a reasonable degree, that's a good thing. But ultimately, it's the wrong emphasis. Now, we now come on to racism, and he's trying to draw an analogy here. It's a bit more than an analogy, actually. He's trying to say racism is a parallel case to disability. Well, that obviously is wrong, because race doesn't entail an inability to function in a normal way, in any way at all. So he's effectively saying all society is structured to hold you back and make things difficult for you if you're not white. Well, the first problem for that is it's inflammatory. It's saying to people, you are getting a terrible deal. All of society is against you. I mean, what sort of message is that to give to young people? Then he says, we can't allow that, recruiting them to the cause. So you see here, it's not saying we need to deal with racist behaviour. It's not even saying we need to deal with racist people. It's saying we need to reform the whole of society. And how? Well, we just got to do whatever it takes to cancel out this so-called privilege by positive discrimination for some, negative discrimination for others.
There's a good chance as a white person watching this, your life is already hard. Every day you have to overcome some difficulty or challenge just to get by, but you can still have white privilege. White privilege doesn't mean you haven't worked hard or you don't deserve the success you've had. It doesn't mean that your life isn't hard or that you've never suffered. It simply means that your skin color has not been the cause of your hardship or suffering. There is nothing but a benefit to understanding our own privileges, white and otherwise. It brings us closer to those who are different. It helps us be vigilant about the ways we treat others different than us. It helps us make a society that is fairer and more equal. Having white privilege doesn't make your life easy, but understanding it can help you realize why some people's lives are harder than they should be.
So again, this idea is not so much saying, you might be the victim of racism. It's also there's white privilege. And the emphasis on white privilege is the idea it justifies bringing people down a peg or two. I think that's my insight of the day, really. That's what the whole idea of privilege is about. It's trying to communicate to people the message that because of various aspects of your so-called identity, you deserve to be treated less favourably on the basis of group identity, which leads to injustice on an individual level, and is completely wrong, but it's what pupils get taught in Scottish schools. Let's go round to the classroom next door, where another S2 has been shown another BBC video about racism. This time the Panorama programme about George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter movement. This was shown to a Scottish class of 14-year-olds, totally unbalanced, sheer indoctrination. Off we go.
We don't want no more police.
With violent scenes and police forces seemingly out of control.
Get in the hole!
Do you notice that? Violent scenes, but the police are out of control. Scenes, not violent protesters, not violent Black Lives Matter supporters, just violent impersonal scenes, whereas the police, well, that's the real problem, obviously, isn't it? They're out of control.
It's racism against the world, and if you're not with us, you're against us. If you're not with us, you're racist.
Do you get that, class? So you support Black Lives Matter or you're a racist. It's as simple as that. Write that down in your jotters. Oh, by the way, I think in the next lesson, the teacher did show another video giving another point of view on Black Lives Matter. No, obviously, just joking. There's no chance that would ever happen in a school in Scotland. Is it normal to show footage of people being killed in school lessons? I don't think it is. But obviously they can make a special case in this particular instance.
And through the nation's turmoil, what of its leader?
I am your president of law and order.
You can see the anti-Trump intention here. They're trying to mock Trump by saying, he says he's the president of law and order. Then they juxtapose that with images of violent scenes, hoping that people don't manage to think through what he was actually saying, that he would deal with the violence and disorder.
America's police developed from the patrols that captured runaway slaves.
Oh, well, they must be racist then. I mean, what a feeble argument. It's like saying the British legal system developed from the system that used to have witches tried by ducking stool and men judged by trial by combat. Yeah, but so what?
African Americans are 2.5 times more likely to die at the hands of a cop than whites.
On the other side of the argument, the proportion of people from different races who engage with the police, the proportion of crime committed by people of different races, doesn't get a mention.
It is a fact of life that when you think about it, while racism is a black issue, it's actually a white problem.
Really? Again, no racism between any other groups? And uses the phrase, when you think about it.
If lasting change does come, it will be because of one man's death, which in 8 minutes and 46 seconds raised hopes of bridging a racial divide.
So here ends the promotional video on behalf of the Black Lives Matter movement. Another lesson finished in a Scottish school, off they go for break time. It was obvious when the Black Lives Matter movement was at its peak earlier in the summer that Scottish schools would be going into ideological overdrive this term, ramping up indoctrination with renewed confidence. The education system in Scotland is already heavily infiltrated by critical race theory. The idea that racism is not just about individual incidents, but it's about a power struggle between oppressed and oppressor groups in society. And that includes the idea now of white privilege, positive discrimination, etc. So I think I've laid out pretty clearly there yet more examples of the sort of indoctrination going on in Scottish schools. And as usual, I issue my plea, please, will someone come and debate with me? A teacher? Someone from Education Scotland? Not much chance there. They've blocked us on Twitter even, just for politely critiquing their points of view. GTCS? Someone from a teacher training establishment? Anybody? You just can't get anyone to come forward and actually defend the policy of education in Scotland. I suppose from their point of view, why bother? They're too busy getting paid to turn the Scottish education system into a network of indoctrination camps. Now, if you think this is bad, the next video is going to be about critical race theory at GTCS, the General Teaching Council of Scotland. And if you think this is bad, you ain't seen nothing yet. Right, do sign up for our annual conference, online obviously, on Saturday. There'll be a link below this video. And thanks for watching.